From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Kaylee Lyons. Donald Trump and his allies push back on a stopgap government funding measure, leaving Congress in limbo ahead of a midnight Friday deadline. We'll have more with congressmen from both sides of the aisle, Democratic Jake Auchincloss of Massachusetts and Republican Ralph Norman of South Carolina. Plus, Norman, who sits on the House Financial Services Committee, will weigh in on the Fed, which delivered a 25 basis point rate cut today and signaled only 2 more will come in 2025, driving the worst stock sell-off since August. And the Supreme Court says it will hear TikTok's challenge to a law that would see it banned next month, with arguments set for January 10th. We'll bring you the details. Thanks for joining us on this Wednesday evening. And we begin with a rapidly evolving story. Backlash against House Speaker Mike Johnson's stopgap measure to keep the government funded past midnight Friday. After intense pushback from Elon Musk and other conservatives, now President-elect Donald Trump and Vice President-elect J.D. Vance have come out against the 1,547-page bill, which would have extended government funding until mid-March. And they're now pushing for a streamlined package that also increases the debt ceiling. Joining me now for more is Bloomberg's Laura Davison here in our Washington studios. So, Laura, forgive the unsophisticated question, but what exactly is going on here?
So this is a really complicated and really fast-moving situation. This was not supposed to be a controversial bill. Everyone was supposed to vote on this and get home for the holidays. But what we have is what started this morning, really, is that Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, Trump's picks to essentially rein in government spending, are getting an early jump start on their job, basically saying, we don't like this bill. It's filled with a bunch of pork. This started a bunch of rumblings within Republican caucus and a question of, is Donald Trump going to weigh in? He just did that moments ago and said, no, he doesn't want a package that is this big. He wants to streamline it. He wants to strip out some of the extra stuff. The Republicans added things like disaster aid, child care funding, an extension of the farm bill. And the thing that he's really asking that is probably going to be the most politically problematic is he also wants to vote on raising the debt ceiling now. Congress was originally slated to do this sometime this summer. Trump says he wants to do it under Biden's watch versus under his. This is always a tough vote. Usually there are, weeks of negotiations heading up to this. To do it in 48 hours is going to be a really, really tall ask and potentially means that we could be tipping towards shutdown territory.
And of course, we're just a week out from Christmas as well. A lot of lawmakers were trying to get home for the holidays as soon as possible. So it just does raise the question on what realistically happens next year, what the plan B will be, and who's going to be leading that charge, because I would imagine Democrats really don't want anything to do with this changing narrative.
Democrats don't want anything. And this is not, they're kind of saying, look, this is your show, Republicans. You got yourselves into this mess. The simplest path forward is to, basically cut back any of the extras that were in that CR, just extend government funding straight, and then, deal with some of the other things like disaster aid next year. That's not simple, but that's sort of the easiest vote for members to take. But Trump generally gets his way in some of these fights. Not always, but frequently he does. So if they are going to vote on the debt ceiling, if you have people like Elon Musk egging people on, we could end up in a situation where Friday night lawmakers are still not going home and, there's a shutdown, really, causing a lot of drama going into Christmas week.
And just quickly, Laura, come January 3rd, what does this do to Speaker Johnson's odds of staying Speaker Johnson?
Calls into a lot of questions. This is the same thing that, ousted his predecessor, Kevin McCarthy, fights over spending bills, the deals cut with Democrats. He faces a vote on his members in just a couple weeks. Really unclear.
All right. Bloomberg's Laura Davison. Thank you. Now, as expected, the Fed cut rates another quarter point today, the third time in a row, signaling fewer cuts in 2025 at the same time. Here's Chair Jay Powell in his news conference this afternoon.
I think that the slower pace of cuts for next year really reflects both the higher inflation readings we've had this year and the expectation that inflation will be higher. You saw in the SEP that risks and uncertainty around inflation we see as higher. Nonetheless, we see ourselves as still on track to continue to cut.
Joining me now is Bloomberg's economics editor, Michael McKee, who was at that news conference with Chairman Powell. So, Mike, obviously the markets reacted quite poorly to this, at least the equity markets did. Walk us through the thinking here when they're forecasting higher inflation next year, but cut rates today and still say they'll cut in 2025?
Well, I think you basically set up the prerequisite for that kind of discussion when you were talking to Laura. Nobody knows what fiscal policy is going to be Friday, let alone next time the Fed meets. So the Fed was being very cautious today. They pulled back because they see inflation is a little bit stuck right now. It's not moving down from about 2.5%. And they don't know what Donald Trump's fiscal policies are going to be. Powell did say that some of the members of the committee had their staffs model what some of the effects could be, and they incorporated that into their forecast, but not all of them. So it's really a mixed muddle. And since Trump is sort of acting as president today, but really doesn't take office until January 20th, you sort of have to say today's Fed decision, if it were a milk carton, would say expires January 20th.
Well, that probably is very true. And it was striking that Powell was asked specifically about the kind of tariff policy that Trump could pursue and what it means for inflation, comparing it to the first administration and the kind of guidance they were working with in 2018. How similar is 2025 going to be in that regard?
Well, we don't know. The 2014 examination that the Fed staff did of how to react to tariffs basically took it as Donald Trump wants to put in 10%, just straight tariffs across the board. And if you do that, here are the impacts. Now, if he's talking about 10% for the whole world, if he's talking about 60% for China, maybe something on Mexico, maybe something on Canada, it's really hard to come up with any kind of coherent forecast. So the Fed's view is if it were just one off, it's a one-time big rise in the price level, but it's not ongoing inflation. But there's just no way to know.
All right, Bloomberg's Michael McKee, thank you so much. Now, also today, the Supreme Court said it will hear TikTok's challenge to the law that would ban the social media app in the U.S. on January 19th if it isn't divested by its Chinese parent company by then. Arguments are scheduled for January 10th, just 9 days before the deadline. Joining me now is Bloomberg's Greg Stohr, who covers the Supreme Court. So, Greg, is there going to be time for an actual ruling in this window, and are they likely to diverge from what the appeals court said?
Well, on the first question, yes, there will be time. That's why the Supreme Court set it up this way. It's certainly a tight time frame, but just to put it in perspective, when the court decided the 2000 election, the Bush v. Gore case, it did that in about a day and a half. So the court can issue a major ruling that quickly. In terms of whether it will do what the appeals court did and say this law is constitutional, there are a lot of different views on that. I'm not going to hazard a prediction. Basically, the case pits free speech interests, both of TikTok and of users, against national security, because Congress said that Chinese ownership of TikTok ran the risk of China taking Americans' data and spreading propaganda.
And quickly, Greg, as we do consider this law was passed in a bipartisan manner by Congress, signed by President Biden, what would it do to future congressional authority if the court were to rule on the side of TikTok in this instance?
Well, of course, it would depend on what the court said, but those are generally pretty powerful interests. National security with, as you said, both of the elected branches of government, Congress and the president, saying we need this law, we need this ban, or at least a spinoff of TikTok to protect the national security. For the court to second guess that would certainly be a very, very big deal and could have ramifications in a lot of unforeseen areas.
All right, Bloomberg's Greg Stohr, thank you so much. Still ahead, we'll get more on the rapidly changing government funding debate on Capitol Hill. Democratic Congressman Jake Auchincloss of Massachusetts will join me live from there next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Vivek and I talked last night about almost midnight, and he said, look, I get it. He said, we understand you're in an impossible position. Everybody knows that. Remember, guys, we still have just a razor-thin margin of Republicans, so any bill has to have Democrat votes. They understand the situation. They said, it's not directed to you, Mr. Speaker, but we don't like the spending. I said, guess what, fellas? I don't either. We got to get this done because here's the key. By doing this, we are clearing the decks, and we are setting up for Trump to come in roaring back with the America First agenda.
What a difference a few hours makes. That was House Speaker Mike Johnson on Fox News this morning on his conversations with incoming Department of Government Efficiency leadership, who today intensely pushed back against the stopgap government funding measure released last night. And now President-elect Donald Trump and Vice President-elect J.D. Vance have come out against that bill, saying a streamlined one that raises the debt ceiling should be passed instead. And remember, we're working with a midnight Friday deadline here. Joining me now for more on Bloomberg Television and Radio is Democratic Congressman Jake Auchincloss of Massachusetts, who is live this evening from Capitol Hill. Congressman, I cannot imagine what it is like there right now. Is there any way that this Congress, the 118th, is going to be able to raise the debt ceiling?
Nothing's agreed to until everything's agreed to. If they want the debt ceiling as part of this negotiation, then they can put that on the table, but we're going to have to negotiate from first principles then. This is Trump term two, right? It's going to, this chaos, this one hand not knowing what the other hand is doing. Unfortunately, we're starting early with it going into the holidays. We negotiated a good deal, not a perfect deal, a good deal, Democrats with Republicans. We had it signed, sealed, and almost delivered. But then on the Republican side of the table, they didn't know what the other one was doing, and it all fell apart on their side. So if this government shuts down, it's going to be Trump's opening gambit as his second administration begins.
Well, Congressman, your leader, Hakeem Jeffries, posted on X just shortly ago around all of this drama that House Republicans, in his words, have been ordered to shut down the government and hurt the working class Americans they claim to support. He goes on to say, you break the bipartisan agreement, you own the consequences that follow. Sir, what do you take that to mean? What messaging are you getting from your leadership as to whether Democrats will be willing to provide any votes to any plan other than what was initially proposed?
It's frustrating for Democrats because we negotiated in good faith with Republicans for a bill that helps the American people. It helps those suffering from the fallout of the hurricanes. It ensures that we are funding critical programs and services over the holidays and ensures that holiday travel is not snarled by air traffic controller shortages. And then it collapses on their side of the table. And so if they want to come back with a different proposal, they can come back with a different proposal, but we're going to have to renegotiate it from first principles. That's how Congress works. And we're tired of having to always be the grown-ups in the room, from the debt default, from Ukraine aid and Israel aid, from funding the government under Speaker McCarthy's tenure. It's just they always like to message about how they're going to shake things up, but they never actually want to take the votes necessary to deliver for the American people.
Well, Congressman, I'm glad you raised former Speaker Kevin McCarthy, because I think we all recall it was a continuing resolution that ultimately led to his ouster. And now, as we consider the fate of Speaker Mike Johnson, who's, of course, going to have to be elected Speaker again on January 3rd when the 119th Congress sits, will Democrats be willing to do for him what they were not willing to do for McCarthy to avoid all of this descending into even further chaos?
The American people elected a GOP trifecta, GOP in the White House, GOP in the Senate, GOP in the House. The GOP has the initiative. They are going to govern for the next 2 years. They will have the pen on legislation, and they can make this a bipartisan enterprise, as we did in the 117th Congress 4 years ago, where we passed infrastructure and gun safety and domestic manufacturing investments with Republican votes. Or they can try to go it alone and devolve into the chaos and finger-pointing that marked Speaker McCarthy's tenure. That is a decision for Speaker Johnson and Donald Trump to make. I can't force them to make the responsible choice.
Well, do you believe it's only Speaker Johnson and Donald Trump that are relevant here, sir? Where does Elon Musk fall into this equation? Is he really the one that lawmakers, your colleagues, are answering to?
I think Donald Trump and Speaker Johnson are the operative players here. Given the size of Donald Trump's ego, given the size of Elon Musk's ego, I'm not sure what the shelf life is going to be of Elon Musk's tenure within the Trump orbit. In general, when someone tries to eclipse Donald Trump's star power, he doesn't take very kindly to it. To the extent that Elon Musk is trying to make government more efficient, he's trying to cut waste, fraud, and abuse, he's trying to unleash entrepreneurs and engineers to build things, we're happy to work with him. But I'm going to pivot off of the president and the speaker when it comes to Republican politics right now.
Well, so when we consider the funding battles that will lie ahead, even if a continuing resolution can get passed, it's obviously going to kick down the road into next year when Donald Trump will be in office and Democrats will be in the minority in both chambers. How difficult is your party willing to make the life of Republicans and whoever is in Republican leadership. I just wonder realistically what the prospects are for bipartisan funding compromises come January.
Again, this initiative is with the GOP. They've got the gavels. They have talked about doing a sequence of 2 bills, the first being a big energy and border security package, the second being a taxes package. If they want to work in a bipartisan way on energy and border security, absolutely we are here to do that. We have a bipartisan border security bill that could be the basis of the immigration part. We would add into that, I think, documentation and dignity for dreamers. We know that there's permitting reform that we need to do for energy and are happy to have conversations about how we unleash more clean energy dominance here in the United States. On the taxes front, if they're trying to hook up the wealthy and the well-connected, Democrats are not going to subscribe to that. But if they want to talk about how we amortize R&D tax credits for businesses or the affordable housing tax credit for building more homes in this country, then yes, we'll work with them. When you've got the gavel, you've got the pen, and you've got the initiative, so the GOP is going to be responsible for governing.
Do you think the most responsible potential governor with the gavel, though, is Mike Johnson? If he were to decide, I'm putting up this piece of legislation anyway, it's going to the floor, and I will take whatever consequences follow, which could very well mean the Republicans try to elect another speaker, would that actually be the worst outcome for your party as you try to pursue these bipartisan avenues?
So Speaker Johnson did that with Ukraine aid, as you may recall. He put that bill on the floor to fund Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan, even though he knew he was going to get a motion to vacate, and Democrats protected him. And that's just another example of the fact that ultimately Democrats are going to do the right thing for people who do the right thing. I'm not going to play the chess match here of 4 moves out, where if Speaker Johnson next term does this, that, or the other thing, what will we do? But the point is, we are the grown-ups in the room. We'll continue to be the grown-ups in the room when it comes to governance, and we will do the right thing for those who do the right thing.
Well, let's continue on what you brought up, which is Ukraine aid. If we can't even sort out funding our own government, what is your degree of confidence, sir, that there will be any future funding for Ukraine and other allies that makes its way through the 119th Congress?
Ukraine's getting $50 billion in the next several months, and that's because of a G7 accord that President Biden negotiated where Europe and the United States have given Ukraine loans that are underwritten by Russian frozen assets, about $300 billion, mostly kept in Belgian banks. So we are actually funding Ukraine's industrial base using Russian money, and that is providing an economic lifeline for Ukraine and a signal to the Kremlin that they're in it for the long haul. A lot of the reporting on this war has made it seem as though Russia is making these huge advances on the Eastern Front. They're not. They're only making advances in one of the 4 oblasts, and even there they are trading a tremendous amount of casualties for every square kilometer gained. Ukraine can absolutely win this war, but we've got to authorize them to use U.S.-made weapons to attack inside of Russia, and we have to hold fast for sovereignty and self-determination for Ukraine. We cannot sell them out.
Just quickly, Congressman, obviously the incoming president is pushing hard, saying he wants a deal between Russia and Ukraine. Would you encourage Ukraine to not join them at the negotiating table?
It depends what the deal looks like. So Ukraine needs to have a secure eastern border with security guarantees from its NATO allies. Ukraine needs to have freedom of navigation in the Black Sea. Ukraine should be acceding to the European Union. If those 3 things are true, then those can be good terms for settlement. Of course, we always want war to end. But Vladimir Putin only knows one language, and that is strength. So you do not negotiate from a position of weakness. Ukraine should be changing the facts on the battleground as much as possible in the months ahead so that they're in the strongest position at the negotiating table.
All right, Congressman, thanks so much for your time. That's Democratic Congressman Jake Auchincloss of Massachusetts joining us live from Capitol Hill, where things are moving very quickly. Now, still ahead, we'll take a closer look at the semiconductor industry and how the U.S. is trying to shore up supply in a bid to compete with China. This is Micron forecasts second quarter results below estimates. We'll have all those details next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Micron shares are tumbling in after-hours trading after the chipmaker's second quarter revenue forecast missed projections by $1 billion. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall has the details. Tyler?
Yeah, hey, Kaylee. Micron today gave a weak sales forecast for this quarter. They cited lackluster demand from makers of phones and PCs, the 2 consumer-oriented markets that use their products the most. The company added that they, quote, anticipate a return to growth in the second half of our fiscal year. Now, analysts say they see that fueled by the future of artificial intelligence.
The memory market at the moment is extremely polarized. On one hand of the market, you have AI infrastructure that is consuming as much memory as it can. That part of the market is doing incredibly well.
Micron did confirm they are seeing strong orders for components used in AI. The company received more than $6 billion in funding under the CHIPS and Science Act. That money was awarded just last week with the goal of creating domestic manufacturing jobs. The U.S. has an ongoing goal of shoring up domestic AI and chip production like this to compete with China. Even this week's stopgap measure from Congress that's meant to keep the government open includes a provision that would further restrict U.S. investment in some Chinese tech sectors lawmakers say could threaten national security. One of those sectors is what's known as foundational chips, older models of semiconductors that are in many everyday items that we use. Bloomberg News is reporting the Biden administration is set to launch a trade investigation into this industry in the coming days. It could result in new tariffs under the next administration. Kaylee, you spoke with Joe Livornia, the former chief economist under the first Trump administration, who broadly defended any of Trump's tariff threats.
I see President-elect Trump's policies as expanding the supply side of the economy, its potential, productivity, basically, its ability to produce the things that we want. This is a negotiation. Tariffs will be a very powerful and important tool that will be used. I just think it's incorrect to look at them as being inflationary.
It does go both ways. Last week, a regulator in China launched an antitrust probe into U.S. chip maker NVIDIA. Kaylee, these are just the latest escalations that we're seeing in this ongoing competition for chips and artificial intelligence.
And Tyler, just quickly, as we consider tariffs on China in particular, this is tariffs that came up in the Fed's press conference today with Chairman Powell.
Right, of course. So I was actually there at the Federal Reserve earlier today when that FOMC decision came down, and Powell was asked about potential inflationary impacts from the tariffs that some economists are predicting. And he said it's too soon to know since we don't know the exact specifics of Trump's economic policies that are coming through, but that the committee is starting to think through some potential scenarios. He did say, though, a line that we hear often, that they are not going to rush through this and they're going to be cautious.
All right. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, thank you very much. Coming up, Republican Congressman Ralph Norman of South Carolina will join us live from Capitol Hill, where the future of government funding legislation is very much in question after the president-elect Donald Trump came out against the stopgap measure that came out last night, putting a shutdown on the table for this weekend and raising a lot of questions about the future of House Speaker Mike Johnson. We'll get into all of that with the congressman next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I love the fact that we're trying to get rid of this pork barrel legislation, and we're actually trying to do something productive that's a bipartisan issue. I don't look for the government to shut down. I think ultimately the government will be open around the holidays, and I'm hopeful that whatever we get on the budget resolution, it'll be basically pushed to next year where a more comprehensive, better formed bill than probably what's out there right now, what it comes out as.
Joe Livornia, former chief economist at the National Economic Council in the first Trump administration, weighing in on the firestorm surrounding a stopgap measure intended to keep the government funded through mid-March, but opposed by many conservatives, including now President-elect Donald Trump. Joining me now here on Bloomberg TV and radio for more is one of those who was openly a no on this continuing resolution, Republican Congressman Ralph Norman of South Carolina. Sir, thanks very much for your time. Obviously, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance have signaled they do not want this bill to pass, but we are up against a midnight Friday deadline. If you had to call it right now, is the government shutting down?
Here's what's going to happen. We were supposed to vote on the bill today that was a monstrosity of a bill. It's 1,547 pages. We received it late yesterday afternoon. No one had a chance to read it. What we do know when we skimmed through it was the pork that was in it. You had things that had nothing to do with what we should be spending money on or the FRA caps that we had. So luckily, the members started saying this isn't acceptable. It didn't go through Rules Committee. We didn't get to vote on the different things in the bill, like the $39 billion aid for farmers, which is needed, like the $10 billion for disaster for those hit by Hurricane Emile. But the problem is it had no pay-fors, and we didn't get to vote on it, along with a pay increase for Congress that was in this bill. But bottom line, it worked. I think we will probably have a bill tomorrow. Will the government shut down? I don't know. If we don't come to an agreement, it should shut down. And, you know, the bluff that the Democrats have always used is either give us what we need or we're going to shut it down, the government, and blame you. Look, this country's at a financial on a financial cliff. We can't buy that argument. You got to call their bluff. Present something to present to Schumer.
Well, sir, Elon Musk, who of course has become very close with the president-elect, was reposting things on social media today suggesting the government should be shut down until January 20th, saying yes to those kind of ideas. So is this really all to blame on Democrats? What does Elon Musk have to do with this?
Well, what Elon Musk has to do with it is he's volunteered for he and Vivek Ramaswamy to come up with ways to reduce the cost of government, and he's putting it to the American people. Now, he's weighing in on this because he's been on Capitol Hill. He spent his time hearing from lawmakers, and the issue now is the bill that we have is directly opposed to what DOSH is all about. And so how does that make sense? And the overall issue, though, is why should we be forced to swallow something that's 1,547 pages long that we don't even read? It's not going to work this time.
Well, while Elon Musk may have spent time on Capitol Hill, he is not a democratically elected member to be a representative of the American people like you are. And you mentioned the people that you represent specifically in South Carolina, in states that neighbor it, are hoping that some disaster relief will come from this ultimately. So what is it that you're willing to vote for? Does it have to be a clean CR, or does it have to be a clean CR with disaster funding attached, which arguably would make it not quite clean?
What it has to be to get my vote is to include disaster relief, include funding for the farmers, fully offset by the cuts that are needed to be made that we know of now in government. The programs that Biden put in that that had a price tag that should never have been us pay for, and that's not that hard. Now, if it's just money that we're printing from nowhere, no, I'll never support it. And I don't think the majority of the Freedom Caucus, or really, it'll be interesting to see how the vote goes if this thing is just another spendthrift bill.
Well, and you alluded to the fact that we may see another bill or vote tomorrow. Has the Freedom Caucus gotten direct communication from the Speaker on that, or the Rules Committee, for that matter, on which you sit?
We were supposed to, the Rules Committee, which I'm a member, have been put on notice that we may have a meeting. It's to be determined, so we don't know the date. But look, we put ourselves in this position. It should never come down to this at this late date. Everybody wants to be home for Christmas, but I will stay up here the whole month of January, the rest of December and January, until we get this thing hammered out. And a lot of people will. This is no way to treat the taxpayers' money.
Well, and on the subject of the taxpayers' money and how much can be borrowed and spent, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance have suggested that we should raise the debt ceiling now while Joe Biden is still in office. Sir, would you support a debt ceiling increase in this 118th Congress, or at the very least the early days of the 119th? Is that realistic?
I wouldn't support that. I would never vote for that. I mean, with $37 trillion and counting, the interest alone that we're paying on the money that we borrowed is going to eclipse the money for the military of $830 billion. So, no, that's insanity in and of itself. I would not vote for that. Look, we've got to get a handle on this. And is it going to be painful? Yes. Is every dollar that's spent in Washington has a lobbyist behind it and has an advocate? Yes. But this train is coming off the tracks on this country, and it's because of our fiscal incompetence. We can't continue it.
Well, and certainly the fiscal picture is being considered by those who have to make monetary policy decisions. Sir, I know you sit on the House Financial Services Committee. We obviously, in the mix of all of this other funding news today, got a Federal Reserve rate decision where they signaled they may cut rates fewer times than expected next year. And the chairman, Jay Powell, was pretty clear on the fact that they just aren't clear what's going to come and what will happen under the policies of this incoming administration. What would your message to Chairman Powell be in that regard?
My message to Chairman Powell will be, and I understand he wants to stay during the Trump administration, but the Trump administration is going to get a handle on inflation. You have inflation because you print money. They're printing money because they're spending money that they don't have. That's got to come to a complete stop. And the $2 trillion that has been mentioned that's going to be carved out through repetitive programs and through waste is $2 trillion. That's not a drop in the bucket. It's a teardrop in the ocean. We owe $38 trillion, not counting Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, which is going bankrupt. So we've got a reckoning to deal with, but the big thing is the beauty of what's happening now. It's going to be done in front of the American people. And through the Dose Commission and through what we're doing now in the bill, if we do a clean CR, the American people are going to see where their money's going. It's not going to be hidden in fine print like the pay raise for Congress.
And finally, sir, last question on Congress and your leader, House Speaker Mike Johnson. When that speaker election happens on January 3rd, is he going to have enough support, or did all of this just greatly diminish his chances?
Look, I like Mike. He's a great Christian guy. What's happened has not helped his chances because we've been screaming, tell us, we've got the majority, the conservatives have the speakership. Let's govern like that. I don't care whether we have 1 vote margin or a 20 vote margin. Let's treat the taxpayers' money like it's our own money and get back into balance. And I think it's hurt his chances. But look, an hour a day in politics is a lifetime. We'll see when January 3rd comes along and see what happens.
Well, we've certainly learned that lesson today, Congressman. Things have literally been changing by the hour, and we appreciate you joining us at this hour. Republican Congressman Ralph Norman of South Carolina, thank you for your time, sir. Coming up, we'll continue our conversation of the drama surrounding government funding engulfing Congress with our political panel. It's still ahead on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Thursday, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken sits down for an interview with Bloomberg's David Gura as he prepares to leave office. Tune in Thursday, only on Bloomberg.
This is Trump term 2, right? It's going to, this chaos, this one hand not knowing what the other hand is doing. Unfortunately, we're starting early with it, going into the holidays. We negotiated a good deal, not a perfect deal, a good deal. Democrats with Republicans. We had it signed, sealed, and almost delivered. But then on the Republican side of the table, they didn't know what the other one was doing, and it all fell apart on their side. So if this government shuts down, it's going to be Trump's opening gambit as his second administration begins.
Democratic Congressman Jake Auchincloss of Massachusetts earlier this hour discussing the current stopgap funding bill, which appears to be going nowhere fast because the president-elect Donald Trump is against it. So where do we go from here? Joining me now on Bloomberg TV and radio to try to help answer that question is this evening's political panel. Ashley Davis, founding partner at Westfront Strategies and Republican strategist, alongside Aisha Mills, Democratic strategist and founder and CEO of Community Asset Management. Welcome to you both. It's been quite a day.
Yeah,
the news now is very different than it was just an hour ago or this morning when we thought we had a deal and the government would not shut down. Who's to blame for all of this hitting the fan, Ashley? Is it the president-elect or is it Elon Musk?
Oh, I don't even know if I'd go that far, and I'm not even going to say it's the speaker cutting the deal. But I do think that Elon / the president needed to come out in regards to the 1,500-page bill. I mean, if they're saying what they want to say in regards to cutting government, this turned into a government spending package that was not a CR, but it was almost an omnibus with so much policy, whether it was healthcare policy, pay raises. I'm not saying I'm for or against the pay raises, actually changing their health care from Obamacare. So, I mean, it was just a lot. It was 1,500 pages, as you know.
1,547, in fact.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, I just think that it was very surprising, and I think the speaker had to figure out how to cut the deal, and he needed the disaster relief, and he needed the farm subsidies. So it was just one of these back and forths that just ended up becoming a huge snowball. Well, and it was interesting. I actually don't think Elon came out today or Vivek came out today without Trump knowing exactly what they were doing. I'm not buying into the fact right now, maybe I'm being naive about it, but I don't think Elon went out and said this on his own.
Well, and it didn't just stop with the people who will be leading the Doge. Trump's son, Don Jr., was even out saying that this is a bill that shouldn't pass over concern around.
Exactly.
So I guess my question is, where is all of this going, considering we are working with a midnight Friday deadline here, and it does feel like everything has blown up and we're starting from scratch. Aisha, so are we about to get a pre-Christmas government shutdown?
Well, I would hope not, but let's also remind ourselves that we always find ourselves here. When was the last time that Congress actually passed a budget with a really intentional, deliberative process that looked like good governing?
Not in my lifetime.
Never. It's always a gun to your head, 11th hour, backroom negotiation, holding the American people and certainly the 4 million employees and contractors who could go without a paycheck this holiday season if the government shut down, holding them hostage. And so I think that what we're seeing on display, we should all remember, is what government looks like when it's broken. And that is what's problematic. And I can't for the life of me understand why you have a speaker that's already in a precarious position of needing to reach across the aisle and negotiate to move anything because the margins are so thin in terms of that majority. So why you would have the incoming president and his folks who are technically on their side derailing that negotiation process also feels a little bit like the Republicans are kind of eating themselves from within. And so that gives me pause about the fact that they're going to have both houses of Congress and the presidency going into January. Will anything move? Because there won't be anyone to blame, right? You can't blame the obstructionists and the Democrats. What are they doing within themselves?
Well, so let's talk about one individual in particular, and that is House Speaker Mike Johnson, who you were talking about, Ashley, had to do all this wheeling and dealing, and it ultimately turned out into this monstrosity of a bill. We were just speaking with Republican Congressman Ralph Norman, who said this does not help his chances of staying Speaker in January.
And you've already had one member come out today and say that he wasn't going to vote for him, and when you have a minority that's so small, I just don't know who else is going to be next. I mean, we've went through this process embarrassingly before, but I do want to say, sitting here right now, to pass a bill with 15 pages that just extends the government funding, does disaster relief funding, is 15 pages, and they can probably get that done if that's what they need to do in the next 48 hours. I mean, I really think that that's where they probably go to. But I think that we may be here January 3rd where we don't know who our speaker is going to be. And we're going to have a very significant vote where you're going through votes and votes and votes and votes again. I mean, and you still have one thing, and going back to what you said, one thing that I was hoping with Trump being elected is that you would have the extreme right fall in line. And maybe they will once he takes office, or otherwise the reconciliation bills are never going to happen in regards to tax reform, you know, whatever it is, border, energy. So if they don't get in line because Trump says to get in line, but I feel that this was a coordinated effort to blow this up when you had Elon, when you had Vivek, when you had, Don Jr., and now the president come out and vote.
Well, so if they try to put
against it.
Humpty Dumpty back together again in some fashion here, which Ashley suggests could still happen by the deadline, I assume that would mean you bypass the Rules Committee, you try to pass this thing on the House floor under suspension. That will require Democrats. Are they going to be willing to put up the votes if it's not the original deal?
Well, as long as they get some of the things that matter to them in terms of negotiation. And the one thing that I keep coming back to that I just don't understand for the life of me, why it's a debate point, is this idea around disaster relief. We are literally just months removed from the worst hurricane since Katrina. Okay, we've had 2 this year, actually, in 2024, and are still cleaning up North Carolina, Florida, from all of this, South Carolina. The fact that we wouldn't be thinking about how to help the American people, how to deal with the billions of dollars in agriculture that were lost, why we're not seeing this certainly as a governing imperative, as a clear policy principle that matters to everyone, especially those red states, by the way, that the Republicans represent. It seems to me that there's a lot of political football going on that doesn't take into account what is best for the American people. And that disaster piece is a big piece to me, because that's not a political ploy. That's, oh my goodness, we just had something awful happen in America. What can we do to make sure the funding is there? God forbid something like this happens again. And now they want to, kick that around. And so I don't think that it's the Democrats playing politics and throwing an omnibus together. It's, well, we have an opportunity to safeguard ourselves and to make sure that we're in a better position.
So just to go, I agree with you, and disaster release is usually not paid for in regards to, being offset. So I think that you would have an argument to get that Democrat vote, Democrats in South Carolina, Florida, North Carolina, that you can say, let's do a clean CR, no policy, nothing else. You get it to March 16th or 15th or 14th, whatever the date is, and then you include the disaster relief to help out these states, which you're exactly right. And because maybe people can swallow that because it's usually not historically offset.
All right, well, we'll see if it indeed can be swallowed. We have a lot still to come on this story. Ashley Davis and Aisha Mills are staying with me. Coming up, we'll have a little bit on Matt Gaetz next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Last week, the Speaker of the House and the Majority Leader said that the report into serious allegations of misconduct by former Representative Matt Gaetz was, quote, moot because he had resigned from Congress. 4 members of Congress spanning each of the last 4 decades, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans. All 4 of them resigned from their seats while under investigation by the House Ethics Committee. In 3 of the 4 cases, the report of the Ethics Committee was released to the public. In none of those cases did anyone have the gall to declare those reports to be moot.
Democratic Congressman Sean Casten of Illinois last week speaking on the House floor, emphasizing why he thought the Ethics Committee should release their findings on former Congressman Matt Gaetz. Now today, CNN and others are reporting that the ethics panel voted to do just that. So we may actually see this thing. Back with me now for final thoughts is our political panel this evening, Ashley Davis and Aisha Mills. So we should point out here that Matt Gaetz is no longer a member of the House of Representatives. He is no longer a nominee to be Attorney General of the United States, Aisha. So what would be the point?
Well, first of all, Justice, because there are presumably people in this report who were harmed. And if they want to take some action to get justice, they should be able to. Transparency matters. Matt Gaetz is also going to go off and try to continue a political career. He's probably going to want to run for governor. We should absolutely know the outcome of that report. I think it's very important, and there's precedent for it.
Well, so precedent really is the question here, though, Ashley. Why some people had concerns about this being released after he left the chamber was that it opens the door to air everyone's dirty laundry, even once they're gone.
So that's just a little my concern. Nothing to do with Matt Gaetz. Like, take that off the table. I from what I understand, a Republican flipped, which is why they're in the original vote of not releasing it, and so that's not we're releasing it. But my question is, now who leaks? Who leaks other stuff about other congressmen, Democrats, Republicans, and what does this open? And maybe it's a good thing it's all open, as you commented. I just think that it will never be the same after this happens.
Well, we know that Matt Gaetz, in our final minute here, did take himself out of contention for a post in the second Trump cabinet. And we were wondering if anyone else might pull a Gaetz, if you will, Aisha. If you had to call it now, is anyone else not making it through this whole confirmation process?
I'm sure there's going to be more than one person who doesn't make it through the whole process because the Senate won't confirm them. But here's the thing. If you've got baggage, you've got baggage. You got dirty laundry, you don't want to come out, then you shouldn't be putting yourself in positions where you're going to be, interrogated by the public. It's just the reality of it.
Well, and we got a date today, according to CNN, for the interrogation of Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary designated. So people are saying Brett Kavanaugh 2.0, Ashley.
Right, which I wonder, and Brett's a good friend of mine, and I worked with him for years, and so I've got different opinions on that. But I do think that this is going to be an interesting situation. Obviously, the president on purpose backed him, so he's going forth. But I think the hearings are going to make all the difference. If he fails in these hearings and there's things that come out during these hearings, on any of them, whether it's Tulsi, whether it's him, whether it's, RFK, I mean, whoever it is, we're all going to get our popcorn out, and they're going to be exciting, made-for-TV
And remember,
movies.
midterms are coming.
Well,
so
that's
what
exactly.
happens?
And the inauguration's coming. I mean, that hearing's going to be 6 days before Donald Trump takes the oath of office.
And he won't be voted on until after that week, right? But I'm just saying, you're exactly right. I'm assuming more will happen that week.
So much to look forward to. Ashley Davis and Aisha Mills, thank you both for joining me on a very busy news day here in Washington.
It's Christmas.
I know. We all thought that.
Or the holidays.
Can't quite say happy holidays yet. I certainly will be back for more tomorrow here on Bloomberg TV and Radio. And on Bloomberg TV and Radio tomorrow morning, make sure to tune into Bloomberg's interview with Secretary of State Antony Blinken. It's at 8:15 a.m. Wall Street time with my colleague David Gura on Bloomberg.